The ocean is a universal resource. Though its use is widespread, we often fail to recognize and appreciate the intricacy with which it functions. Most frequently overlooked are the interactions among the sun, the moon, and the waters of the earth. Tides are the longest waves reaching halfway around the globe. They are composed of flood and ebb currents driven by the gravitational pull of the sun and moon. These cause high and low tides respectively. The highest and lowest tides are known as spring tides, and they occur bi-monthly according to the relative positions of the sun and moon to the earth. They occur when these three celestial bodies are perfectly aligned. If the moon is between the earth and the sun, the highest of spring tides occur due to the additive effect of the sun and moon's gravitational influences. If the earth is between the moon and the sun, however, the lowest of spring tides occur due to the cancellation of these forces. When the sun, moon, and earth are positioned at a right angle to each other, moderate neap tides take place. This marine dynamic system is further influenced by other abiotic factors, such as the shape, symmetry, and the wind and temperature patterns of the coastal region. The effects of tides on marine ecosystems are many. They influence the nutrition, salt concentration, prey-predator relationships, and reproductive ability of many organisms. We will be focusing on the influence of tides on marine plants, mollusca, crustacea, echinodermata, and osteichthyes communities in the San Pedro tide pools.
Although marine plants may appear vastly different than most land plants, they maintain the same role in their aquatic environments as primary producers that provide food for the consumers in the higher trophic levels. The bodies of the plants also serve as shelter for many other organisms. A common surf grass, Phylospandex phalori, covers the rocks around the tide pool, making a slippery surface at low tide. In addition to its many other roles, surf grass controls the temperature of the water, keeping it on average 10 degrees Celsius cooler than areas that had surf grass removed. These colder temperatures are necessary for the plethora of animals that can survive in only a narrow temperature range. The surf grass also increases diversity within the tide pools, preventing large plumes of red algae from stripping the resources from the shallow pools.
In the same phylum, kelp is one of the largest multicellular protists. Its anatomy is comprised of an anchoring holdfast, a supporting stipe, and photosynthetic blades. In the intertidal region, kelp's ecological role varies in conjunction with the amplitude of the waves it's exposed to. Kelp forests have a much lower level of resident species diversity when located in more turbulent environments. In these environments, constantly exposed to the abrasive forces of repetitive waves, only those selected for survival in such conditions would prosper. In calmer areas, species diversity remains high with fewer stresses on the varying resident species. The size and shape of these kelps influence the drag experienced in the water. With water velocities around 2 to 3 meters per second rushing around them, these factors become vital in decreasing the chance of dislodgement. Macrocystis porifera and Pegulophycus pora, more commonly known as giant bladder kelp, and elkhorn or bullwhip kelp respectively, are two common species to this area. By living so close to shore, they share a turbulent life cycle depending on the waves to bring in nutrients. This is a stark contrast to the kelps growing in deep waters that have a more constant supply in their stable environment. The giant bladder kelp is often found in more shallow areas, given it needs higher amounts of sunlight than the bullwhip kelp, which prefers deeper areas with less irradiance. While many of the roles of the kelps are more easily seen, the giant bladder kelp plays an important role on the microscopic level, housing several hundreds of bacterial groups. Another group, which is often hard to see with the naked eye, is plankton. As another primary producer, they reproduce as rapidly as they are consumed by zooplankton or other larger organisms. Both plankton and zooplankton rely on the tides for diurnal migration in addition to movement during non-modal phases throughout development.
Cnidarians are heterotrophs easily recognized by the often brightly colored tentacles that recoil to their stalk upon touch. Anthopleurocxenogrammic or solitary anemones are named for the characteristic to live further apart. The spacing of these organisms is determined by their tentacles, which allow them to sense nearby anemones. Upon initial contact, they attack their fellow anemone with the same force as they would a prey. This allows each anemone to sense the size and sex of the other. With this information, they can move away to the appropriate distance so they can all receive adequate nutrition. Their tentacles often still touch, but they no longer attack due to habituation. Anthopleura elegantissima, the colonial anemone, shares the same property, although the spacing is often smaller, allowing them to live closer together. This tendency to aggregate regulates their core temperature, with the more central anemones remaining the coolest. Their thermal tolerance depends on the facultatively symbiotic relationship between the dinoflagellates and algae which live inside the anemones. The unicellular algae provides additional energy by photosynthesis and determines the relative sizes of their host. Those organisms requiring a lower temperature live in larger anemones which can resist thermal increases. The dinoflagellates are so sensitive to the temperature climb that the relative species varies widely by latitude.
Mollusca is a very diverse phylum with organisms which often bear little resemblance to each other. They share a shell which may be external or a reduced internal version. Limpets, for instance, share a distinctive outer shell that appears like an upside-down cone with the tip removed. Common species include Megathura crenulata, the giant keyhole limpet, Colocella digitalis, the fingered limpet, and Colocella scabra, the rough limpet. Some of the Colocella genus can be seen here, clinging to the outside of an anemone. The specific shape and size of their shell is determined by where in the tide pools they are located, and more specifically, what type of waves they encounter. Those limpets which are closer to the shore and therefore encounter more pounding with the changing of tides have the largest shells, correlated with a greater foot surface area. This allows the limpets to adhere more strongly to the surface, in addition to preventing desiccation during low tide. The Aplysia californica, or California sea hare, however, has a reduced internal shell. These sea hares depend on the tides during development once hatching from a large egg mass. The resulting larva has a developing ability to swim, but mainly rely on this movement of the water combined with the cilia around their mouths to gather algal cells for food. As they mature, they begin crawling on the rocky surfaces, as seen here, gaining nourishment by eating seaweeds. The octopus bimaculoids, also known as the two-spotted octopus, is seen here darting beneath the rocks to avoid detection. It too shares the internalized shell, which is reduced to a mere sliver. A relative to the California sea hare is Aplysia vicaria, or black sea hare. It grows to enormous proportions, signaling it has reached maturation in order to mate and produce thousands of eggs in similarly large egg mass.
Similar to mollusks, crustaceans have an exoskeleton, although the shell has many jointed appendages. The Pagarurus samuelis, blue-legged hermit crab, here scurries around scavenging for food. Given these crabs have a soft body, they experience a strong instinct to find a shell to protect themselves. Even when deprived of food for several days, they will choose an empty shell over food, recognizing the importance to their safety. They choose the shells carefully, often choosing new shells that are similar to the ones they lived in previously. These choices are also influenced by the tide movements. Greater water movement causes the crabs to choose heavier shells that allow them to remain on the sea floor even with the turbulence of the waves. The Pachygrapsis chrysipes, striped shore crab, have a harder shell, allowing them to live without an additional shell. While normally not aggressive in the open water, the striped shore crab changes its behavior significantly when living in the tide pools. It becomes an active, aggressive hunter, foraging for food like this jellyfish in its designated crevice in the rocks. No more than one crab is allowed to live in one fissure, with the largest crabs defending the areas with the best resources. This behavior determines the density of the species. However, as the tides go down and the crabs become more exposed, they are more likely to aggregate so as to protect the group.
Sea stars are some of the largest mobile predators found in the ever-changing tidal region. They implement fascinating mechanisms such as morphological plasticity to undertake their ecological roles. Specifically, the ochre sea star adapts the length and width of its arms according to the wave intensity of their natural habitats. Sea stars inhabiting tidal zones exposed to a constant number of intense waves have much longer and narrower arms than those which live in much calmer environments. By decreasing the area available for fixation, this modification reduces resistance to tidal forces, allowing the sea stars to flow more freely and securely. However, this might be disadvantageous for the organism since it greatly reduces the space in which internal organs, such as the gonads, are hosted. Such plasticity may in fact reduce fertility and reproductive rates among sea star communities. A sister taxon of this echinoderm, the brittle star, also depends greatly on tidal action for many of its basic necessities. The Panamanian sea serpent and banded brittle star, for instance, use the tides to access nutrients during their planktonic developmental stage. Through maturation, these organisms grow thin podia, which they use to capture small prey. Reproductive spawning is also influenced by this marine phenomenon. When brittle sea stars are deprived of environmental cues, a large number secrete sperm during low tides despite any contact with the ocean. This maintains highly concentrated gamete levels, directly increasing chances of fertilization, and, due to low water levels, decreases the availability of gametes to predators.
Related to these sea stars, although a bit more exotic looking, are Strongylocentrotus preparatus, or purple sea urchins. The characteristic spines cover their chest, aiding in both protection from predators and locomotion along the rocky bottom. They also allow limited visual acuity. By using the off-axis light that passes by their spines, urchins are able to gain a spatial vision of their surroundings. This function allows the urchins to have either positive or negative taxis to the encountered object. As they feed mainly on seaweeds, urchins prevent the pools from being overgrown, while otters in turn keep the urchins from over-consuming the plants.
The last of the species being examined today are the near-shore fish. Both the Typhlogobius californiensis, blind goby, and Clinocotis analis, woolly sculpin, can be seen darting under the seaweeds, avoiding being spotted by predators such as seagulls. The woolly sculpin seen here depends on the movement of the tides to signal for the eggs to hatch. Once mature, they feed primarily on sea anemones, known for their often paralyzing stings to prey. Sculpins, however, are uniquely adapted for their environment, appearing insensitive to the anemones, allowing them to swim and feed on the tentacles.
The periodic changes in the height of oceans are of ultimate importance to marine ecosystems, in particular intertidal zones. They impact every community at every trophic level, from primary producers like trout to secondary and tertiary consumers like the woolly sculpin. For these reasons discussed today and many others, tides play a large role in the lives of the organisms at the tide pools and the great ocean itself.